Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's daily devotional for Tuesday, July 21st. Birds are chirping in the background, and I don't have my door shut. So, whoops, sorry. Forgot to move my mic properly. My apologies. Welcome to today's daily devotional for July 21st. Today is Tuesday. So, I do want to apologize for the late start this afternoon. We're having issues, I don't know why, with YouTube, trying to get YouTube kind of up and going. I set it to start at 6:25, but it didn't actually get going with the stream until just a minute ago. So I don't know, it was delayed or something. So, but anyway, so hopefully everybody's working okay and everybody's working all right. If you're not, if it's not working very well or for whatever reason, let me know. And I'll see what I can do about it. So our daily devotional today comes from Mark chapter 14. And this is Jesus when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Obviously, when we are going through, any difficult time, whether it's temptation, trials of life, or whatnot, it is important for us to be able to regain our determination and our motivation to stay faithful to God. And obviously, when we think about Jesus and everything that he went through, his trial, his beating, his scourging, his being nailed to a cross, those are all things that certainly do help us to consider how important it is that we remain faithful to the Lord. But there's something contained here in Mark chapter 14, and certainly this is a situation of the Jesus in Gethsemane that is also recorded in Matthew. But there's something mentioned here in Mark chapter 14 I want to pick up on for a moment. So when Jesus is in Gethsemane, it says they came to a place which was named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. So they've come to Gethsemane, and now Jesus has gone a little bit further with these three. It's not that these three are more special than the others. It's not that they have some kind of special significance as apostles or anything like that. It just seems as though Jesus tended to be a little bit, from a human perspective, a little bit closer to Peter, James, and John for whatever reason. Personalities sometimes connect to personalities. It's not that he was showing favoritism necessarily, or that he loved them more in some way. But for whatever reason, Peter, James, and John tended to be kind of his, I guess you could say his closest friends as the apostles go. Verse 34, he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." He went a little farther and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, and here's one of the things I want to pick up on here in verse 36. He said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." Jesus, we know, prays three times, and he prays the same prayer all three times, that this cup, which is the cup of suffering, would pass from him, that there would be some other way to accomplish what is necessary for the salvation of man to come about. Of course, Jesus knew full well that there was no other way. But from a human perspective, he knows entirely what he's about to go through. He knows exactly the type of suffering he's about to endure. And he's anxious about it. He's not worried. I mean, he knows he's going to die. It's not a worry. He's anxious. And certainly from a human perspective, we can certainly not, we can't really empathize. We haven't been in that situation, but we can imagine and what that must have been like. But this term Abba, no, not the rock group from the 70s. This term Abba is a very interesting term in the Greek. This is a term that it's less formal than father, and it puts emphasis more on the emotional relationship between a father and a son. It's not as informal. The closest, and I've heard several preachers mention this, the closest that we can really an acknowledgement of authority with father, whereas Abba seems to be more of a stress on the relationship, the love that the son has for the father, whereas father tends to emphasize more the authority, that my place as the son is in subjection to you, the father. So both terms Jesus uses, both with Abba and with Father, to stress both sides of the relationship that he has with the Father. There's that formal aspect, that recognizing authority, but there's also the relationship aspect as well. All things are possible for you, he says. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. Especially when we are in our difficult times and we're struggling with making sure that we do everything that God wants us to do, and we are maybe fighting our own impulses, fighting our own human urges. That particular statement, not what I will, but what you will, is certainly an important angle for us to consider and even to pray in the midst of these types of situations that we go through. He comes back to Peter, James, and John. He found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Certainly, that has obvious application for Peter, certainly, and for all of the apostles, really, and for everybody, to tell you the truth. But certainly, there's an interesting connection, and I'm not saying Jesus says this as much for himself as he does for Peter, but there's certainly a connection here to what Jesus is going through while he's telling Peter the very same thing. It's certainly Jesus is reminding himself, I think, there's certainly a little bit of element to that, lest you enter into temptation. Okay, certainly what Jesus is going through right now would have been a prime opportunity for Satan to tempt Jesus in some way. Now, obviously, we're not given a record of what happened in the garden regarding temptation. But Matthew chapter 4 and the 3 times Jesus was tempted that we have record of in Matthew 4 were not the only times Jesus was tempted. There's absolutely no way that those were the only 3 times in his entire life that he was tempted to sin. The Hebrew writer tells us he was tempted in all points as we are, yet he was without sin. The temptation, I mean, and again, we don't know what the devil knew, or it sounds as though Satan, he was obviously unaware of the full plan of salvation. I mean, if even the angels didn't know fully what the plan of salvation was, and certainly Satan didn't. But the idea here is that Jesus is going through a very human, from a human perspective, a vulnerable time. And so when he says, lest you enter into temptation, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak, that's the very epitome of what Jesus is going through. You know, right now his human side was anxious over what he's about to endure. He's determined. Don't get me wrong. He's determined, and he is submitting to the will of the Father. But that's why he prays this, not what I will, but you will, to remind himself and to focus on the fact that he is there to fulfill the Father's will. And I'm not trying to frame this in any way as if Jesus is having a moment of weakness here. I don't believe that at all. It's just from a human flesh perspective. He knows what he's about to go through, and it's causing him great anxiety. And that's kind of what this is a part of the fact that Jesus is determined. He wants Peter and certainly James and John, the other apostles, to be determined as well. And that's the connection I'm trying to draw here. Not to say that Jesus says this as if he's feeling himself weak. I don't believe that. But certainly that because of his determination and his desire to fulfill the will of God, he wants to make sure that he echoes that in his words to the apostles. In verse 39, again he went away and prayed and spoke the same words. He returned and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to answer him. Whether or not I don't know if he woke them up again. Verse 40, when it says they did not know what to answer him. Did he come back? That time he found them asleep, their eyes were heavy, and then he said, hey, why are you guys sleeping? Again, I told y'all to stay awake. This may actually be a reference to the first time when he came just a few verses earlier in verse 37 and 38. When they didn't know what to say, they don't understand why Jesus is so anxious. They don't fully understand what's about to happen. And so that might be, they just went back to sleep, not understanding what Jesus was talking about. And so when he came back the second time, they're asleep still, and he just turned around and went back into the garden. And then he came the third time and said to them, and of course we know he went back and prayed the third time. He says, are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed in the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And again, as I mentioned before, this is echoed in Matthew chapter 26, I believe, when Jesus, let's see, Passover institution, here's Gethsemane in verse 36. So it's echoed as well, but the one thing that's not here or mentioned specifically by Matthew is the reference to Abba. And that's kind of what I wanted to focus in on, in addition to the broader picture or scene of Gethsemane, and for us to remember what Jesus was going through and yet his determination to remain faithful to the Lord. It's that connection that Jesus acknowledges in his prayer to the Father. It's this recognition that I'm here to do your will. And as anxious as I am, oh Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, not as I will, but as you will. And then verse 42, oh my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. And then, of course, he went away, prayed the third time, saying the same words. It seems as though that prayer, including that detail in Mark about Abba, Father, it just makes it all the more personal. Makes it all the more, I guess from a human perspective, it makes it all the more emotional, because that's really what the Abba, it stresses that relationship, that love between a father and a son. And that fact is it's not lost on us. We see that in the account in Mark. And so putting these two accounts together, we really do appreciate, and we should appreciate, what Jesus went through in the garden. And let this be a reminder for us that when we're in the midst of difficult times and we're facing those trials and temptations ourselves, obviously not to the extent that Jesus did, but when we face these difficult times, that we remind ourselves and even pray ourselves, not my will, but let thine be done, and remind ourselves to be in subject to the Father's will. All right, everybody, that's the daily devotional for you today. Tomorrow we will have our Wednesday Bible study at 7 p.m. And so look forward to seeing everybody then. Thanks, everyone.